Hey guys, and welcome to today's video. In this video, Gigantor strikes again.
I'm Gigantor, the tallest flat earther ever!
If you haven't seen my first Gigantor video, or any of the original Gigantor material from Conspiracy Cats, check them out after this. Links will be in the description. So let's begin.
Hello, Flat Earth researchers, debaters and debunkers. We're going to have a look at the contradictions we are faced with when we are led to believe that we see or experience the effects of Coriolis or a Coriolis force if we are on a spinning globe.
Gigantor, you're an idiot, because you actually get that backwards. There would be contradictions to our knowledge and experience if the Earth were flat and stationary, due to forces we observe in reality, such as Coriolis. The Coriolis force is a fictitious force, which means that it is only present in a non-inertial frame of reference, such as a spinning sphere. Anyone who doesn't have a good grasp on what inertial and non-inertial frames of reference are should pause my video now and go watch this video on frames of reference produced in 1960. It is key to understanding fictitious forces like the Coriolis force. A link will be in the description.
We'll see that it really doesn't apply to our practical reality when doing things on or above the Earth.
Wrong again, idiot. The Coriolis effect must be accounted for when dealing with massive storms, air currents and oceanic water currents around the globe, ballistics, flight planning, and rocket launches. And these are just a few practical applications where the Coriolis force is taken into account. If you guys know of any other practical applications, leave them in the comments below.
And how it actually works fine on a stationary level plane with the sun and moon doing circuits above that plane. And we'll look at the very similar properties of air to water in that it acts very much like a fluid.
First off, no. It doesn't work fine on a flat Earth because the Coriolis effects we see due to rotation are opposite of each other in the northern and southern hemispheres. This is indicative of spherical rotation. On a flat Earth, you could still get some sort of Coriolis effects from some sort of rotating reference frame, however, they would always be in the same direction. As far as liquids and gases acting like one another, this is kind of correct. Liquids and gases do retain similar properties regarding fluidity, as they both take on the shape of their container. However, liquids don't fill their container since liquids remain at a fixed volume as long as temperature and pressure remain constant, whereas gases don't have a fixed volume. Therefore, minus gravity and given enough time, they will fill their container evenly.
So here we can see an illustration from Wikipedia as to what the Coriolis force is supposed to create on the Earth, with these arrows here representing the way winds and hurricanes will have these eddies going in different directions either side of the equator, which is said to be because we are on a spinning globe.
I had to let him get that all the way out so that I could point out just how wrong Gigantor is. Wikipedia is a great source for information, but I use it only as a guideline for further research. I say that because while this graphic is correct, it's also incomplete to a fault. The graphic shows clockwise rotation in the north, however hurricanes, as Gigantor just stated, rotate counterclockwise in the north and clockwise in the south. This graphic shows how the Coriolis effect affects air currents globally because the driving force behind these currents is derived from a high pressure system. As warm air around the equator begins heading north, it also drifts east relative to the North Pole. This is due to the warmer air conserving its momentum as it leaves the equator. As it cools and slows down, it begins heading back towards the equator and begins drifting west relative to the North Pole, also due to its conserved momentum. This process causes a clockwise circular rotation of air that runs westward along the equator and eastward along the top of the current. Opposite to high pressure systems are low pressure systems, like hurricanes, where the eye of the storm is essentially a low-pressure vacuum, and the Coriolis forces causes air to deflect eastward when traveling from the equator relative to the eye of the storm, and westward when traveling towards the eye from the pole side of the storm. So the graphic shown here is correct for high-pressure systems and incorrect for low-pressure systems.
Of course, this is the kind of image we regularly see, and we are told that these eddies of air and air currents go in different directions either side of the equator.
Both of those images are low-pressure systems, and due to my understanding and knowledge of the Coriolis force, I can without a doubt predict that the first storm took place in the northern hemisphere and the second storm took place in the southern hemisphere, unless the images were flipped.
But we can put this down to being just the natural physics of moving air currents, which are very similar to water as well.
Yes, water and air have a few similarities, as we've already discussed, but they also have major significant differences, you idiot. And the ocean currents traveling in the same direction as the air currents are primarily a result of the wind dragging the water at the surface. This creates ocean gyres, which are large circular patterns formed by the currents and the rotation of the Earth. In other words, the Coriolis effect.
This image illustrates it very nicely, and we can see that we have these eddies which go in these different directions here, either side of the equator, with the water as well as with the air, as we see here.
Gigantor, you're an idiot, because you're contradicting yourself by showing Coriolis affected rotation from two different types of systems. The ocean currents being driven by a high-pressure system would be spinning in the opposite directions of the low-pressure system that you're showing on screen, even though they're in the same hemisphere. It does speak volumes to your limited understanding of the topic discussed though, but who doesn't like to watch an idiot argue with a stop sign? So let's continue.
So this basically demonstrates that we have these very similar properties for water and air, and in the way they behave both as liquids.
And you are a fucking idiot. Gases and liquids are not the same. Aside from a few similar properties, they are completely different states of matter and almost completely unique to one another.
This is a good illustration of that. We have, you can see here, this is supposed to be, this is mud in water that gets churned up, and then we have smoke in the air as we get movement. So we have what appears to be a chimney here from maybe a train or something. As it's moving forward, then this resistance is generated, and we get this these eddies of smoke, just as we get these eddies of the mud in the water.
No, Gigantor. The churning of the mud, the swirling of the smoke, and the rotation of global winds and water currents have little to nothing to do with each other. The mud and smoke have more to do with turbulent flow than anything, and Coriolis from Earth's rotation plays no role in creating those vortices. Did you really just see a similar swirling pattern and think to yourself that this must be caused by the same thing? Yeah, you're an idiot.
So we can see here that in water and air we get very similar effects. Air is really very similar to water. It is very liquidy in its behavior. It's just less dense.
I don't know how much I can stress this. Liquids and gases are not the same. They may share a property or two when it comes to fluidity, but they are two distinctly different forms of matter. On screen is a simple diagram showing the distinct properties of solids, liquids, and gases. Not that this is going to help Gigantor, because he's a science-denying flat earth idiot.
And this also is a good example of how we see these eddies being created in the air by this aircraft.
The only thing similar between the vortices at the tips of the wings, known as wingtip vortices, and hurricanes is the driving force that gets the molecules of air moving. In a hurricane, it is the air going from high pressure areas outside of the storm to the low pressure eye of the storm, whereas the wingtip vortices are formed when the higher pressure from underneath the wings tries to escape to the lower pressure on top of the wing. However, the Coriolis force from the rotation of the Earth plays no role in the formation of wingtip vortices, while without the Coriolis force, we would not see the consistent and predictable rotations that we actually observe in large-scale storms.
So again, we are seeing very similar effects in both water and air. Here's another illustration of this is apparently a satellite image of the sea, and it shows us how we see these eddies being very similar to what we see in air.
Looks very similar to does not mean the same as, you idiot. I've described how wingtip vortices are formed, but oceanic eddies are a bit more complicated. I'll leave a link in the description detailing how they are formed, but they mostly have to do with currents running into land masses or slowing down one portion of the current relative to the rest of the current.
So we see very similar behaviors in these two mediums, one just being more dense than the other.
I'm not even going to address this point again. Just add another count to the counter and ring the dinger for the idiot.
So let's keep that in mind as we go through this and look at this particular image. Now this shows us the contradiction that we are faced with if we are to believe that we are on a rotating globe.
I'm not going to prejudge you, Gigantor, but something tells me that you have absolutely no idea what you're looking at, because it explains the Coriolis effect to a T. But I've never really had a desire to stop an idiot from burying himself in his own bullshit. So here's a shovel and get to work.
And then we take off in an aircraft from that rotating globe. If there is this Coriolis force or effect going on in the air because the Earth is rotating, then of course if you consider this ball here to be an aircraft taking off from the Earth, then if it traveled in a straight line to its destination, it shouldn't get to that destination because the Earth should have rotated away from it.
And that's exactly what we see in reality, you idiot. If a ballistic projectile was fired from Miami, pointed directly at New York, it would land somewhere off the coast in the Atlantic Ocean. This has been proven and demonstrated by the military with long-range ballistics, and historically documented as far back as World War II.
It seems very simple, but this is the reality that we experience, because aircraft go from point A to point B and never have to compensate for any alleged spin of the Earth.
I would really like to know when the last time Gigantor flew in an airplane that made no in-flight corrections whatsoever. In reality, airplanes are powered, not ballistic, and make constant corrections from takeoff to landing. The Coriolis effect is so weak that it is almost unnoticeable, very similar to the brain power of all flat earth idiots combined.
This just doesn't happen when we travel through the air above the Earth.
Yes, it does. You just don't get it because you are an idiot.
Also, people often refer to Foucault's pendulum as being some kind of proof that the Earth is rotating under a pendulum that is constantly swinging in the same direction.
Right, because a frictionless pendulum maintains its rigidity in space. This means that if you could devise a pendulum that was free from friction, you could set it in motion and spin its base, and the pendulum would never change its orientation to the fixed stars in the sky. Foucault's pendulum is outdated though. Don't get me wrong, it's a great concept for demonstrating the rotation of the Earth and all, but we now have fiber optic gyros and ring laser gyros that are much more precise than any pendulum man could ever build. And guess what they consistently show, Gigantor? 15 degrees rotation every single time. But flat earthers still say that the Earth is flat and stationary. But flat earthers are fucking idiots.
And again, if this is to believed to be the case, that we have something in the air while the Earth rotates beneath it. We do not experience that when we get into aircraft.
Saying it over and over does not make it true, you idiot. Why don't you step off the peak of Mount Stupid and take the time to interview an actual pilot like Wolfie6020? Ask him if the aircraft experiences Coriolis effects while in flight.
And it should be especially true if we're going to fly through the air faster than or against this alleged spin. We should experience a difference, but we simply do not experience that in our reality.
The Coriolis effect has no significant impact on airplanes flying in an easterly or westerly direction, so the statement is ignorant at best or complete buffoonery by a total idiot at worst.
So what I'd like to do now is just show how it's perfectly feasible to perceive the Coriolis effect that we see in the atmosphere, or the rotation of air and water either side of the equator above a flat Earth.
I'm going to predict problems with your explanation before you even begin, since the opposite spinning circles from the Coriolis force are a direct result of the Earth being a rotating sphere.
So this should be a fairly straightforward illustration to understand. What we have here is the sun doing circuits. It doesn't matter, well, let's say it's going this way, anti-clockwise.
Oh my goodness, Gigantor, you are an idiot. You do realize that if the sun was going counterclockwise, then it would be rising in the west and setting in the east. Now, I'm no flat earther, but I'm pretty sure that's fucking wrong.
Along with the moon, and we can see that as the sun, if it's a local sun, which does make sense to our senses, we can perceive it as being this way.
How we perceive the sun does not determine reality. We perceive the Earth as stationary, but it's spinning. Coriolis supports that. We perceive the sun as traveling above the Earth on a circuit, but it's not, because we are actually orbiting the sun, and Galileo proved that in 1632. Humans are simply not designed to perceive the grand scale of the cosmos or some of the tiny forces within it.
There is no reason to think that the sun is distant and massive. It can be just as we see it.
No, it can't. Because if the sun was small and local, then the planet Venus would not be able to orbit it and pass between the Earth and the sun. Again, Galileo proved this almost 400 years ago. Gigantor, you should probably try explaining simple observations like the Venus traversal before making dumbass statements like that. You are a fucking idiot.
And it will go around in circuits, and as it does so, it pushes the air out of the way, and we get these eddies of air.
Yup, it's confirmed. Gigantor is still an idiot. Because if this were the case, the barrier that exists between the different rotating hurricanes, also known as the equator, would move depending upon the time of the year. When in reality, no matter what time of the year it is, or where the subsolar point lies, all hurricanes south of the equator will always rotate clockwise, and all hurricanes north of the equator will always rotate counterclockwise, due to Coriolis forces. Now before we move on to the final portion of the video, I must warn you, it's about to get really stupid, and I suggest you move away from any expensive china laying around.
And we can say the same about the water, just as we see here, just as we see this aircraft, which you could imagine as being the sun, going through the air, and the heat and all the disturbance and possibly electromagnetic properties of the sun will create these eddies, these vortexes in the air.
I really don't even know what to say about this. If the sun was creating the vortices the same way the airplanes create wingtip vortices, then hurricanes would only form just behind and offset to each side of the sun. Not to mention, if the sun was electromagnetically affecting the environment to that extent, then anyone on the equator would have their compasses point to the east as the sun approaches overhead and to the west as it departs, which no one has ever experienced ever. Gigantor, you're an idiot.
So we can see it as being this way, and it does make sense in terms of real physics.
No, let's get something straight. This isn't real physics. This is flurf physics. And flurfs, especially flurf physicists, are flurfing idiots.
And the same can apply to the moon, and especially the tides, which it's undeniable that the moon and the tides on the earth are intrinsically linked.
I don't get it. Now you're just repeating stuff we already know. It has been scientifically proven that the moon's gravitational effects directly affect tides on Earth.
And we could assume that the moon influences the tides.
Right again. Now watch as Gigantor fucks everything up.
So if the moon in fact has electromagnetic properties which are present and prevalent within the air above our Earth, there's no denying that.
Well, I am denying that, and you are a fucking idiot. Same goes for the moon as the sun. As it approached an observer with a compass, the compass would be influenced by the moon overhead instead of pointing north. Also, water is diamagnetic, meaning that it exerts a weak magnetic field of its own and is repelled by other magnetic fields. In other words, instead of being attracted to the moon as we see in reality, water would be repelled by the moon.
So we can hypothesize and theorize that the moon is doing circuits just like the sun on a very similar path, and as it does so, we get the same effect with these eddies of currents created in the water.
Sure, you can theorize and hypothesize all you want. However, as long as you continue to do so with bad science and a lack of supporting evidence, I will continue to summarize that you and all flat earthers are fucking idiots.
Now, it's also known that salt water is affected by magnets. You can push salt water around with magnets.
Gigantor, you're such an idiot. The sun and moon being small and local and having a significant electromagnetic influence on the environment around them would push the water away instead of attract it. This would have the exact opposite effect from what we experience on Earth. Low tides would be high and high tides would be low.
And of course, fresh water is not affected in the same way, and we do not get tides in fresh water. We only get tides in saline water or seawater.
Gigantor, you're an idiot again. Water loses a good portion of its diamagnetic properties when you add salt. This means that if electromagnetism was the culprit, then freshwater tides would be greater than saltwater tides. And as a side note, tides in freshwater lakes do exist. They are just more subtle.
So again, these are things that all make sense in the realms of real, demonstrable, practical physics.
Flat Earth physics isn't real physics. Flat Earth scientists aren't real scientists. Flat Earth mathematicians don't understand the difference between negative numbers and negative exponents, because all flat earthers, especially Gigantor, are fucking idiots. I think this is where we're going to end it today. I'm not sure I can take much more of Gigantor's bad science and lack of usable knowledge, but Gigantor, like all flat earthers, is a fucking idiot. Now I'd like to take the time out to thank Gigantor, the tallest flat earther out there, for bringing his head low enough for all of the normal height people's entertainment. Gigantor, you're a fucking idiot. Alright guys, thanks for sticking around until the end. I must say that the more that I do this, the more fun it is becoming. If you found that video educational or even entertaining in the slightest bit, please hit that thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't already. A massive shout out and thank you to all of my patrons and channel members that really make all this possible. And an extra special shout out to Glover Chris, the first channel member to become a golden dinger. I'm Father Skeptic, and I'm out.